Welcome to Onward True Podcast. My name is Brandon Chatfield. I'm a professor at NAU here in Arizona, and I'm also a psychotherapist. This podcast is separate from my roles as a professor and a psychotherapist. My goal for this podcast is to help educate people on various mental health and physical health topics as a free resource to the public. This is not meant to replace any kind of professional diagnosis or suggest any type of treatment. For your mental and physical health needs, it's best to consult a mental health professional or a physician. The listener is responsible for their own health and well-being. Thank you. This topic is going to be today is going to be about the nervous system, and it's a complex network of controls that coordinates body functions. It is divided into two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system includes all other neural elements such as nerves and the various ganglia we have in our nervous system. Understanding these structures and the directions within the system is crucial for comprehending the function and the anatomical organization. So we're going to start by talking about the neuraxis, which is an imaginary line that runs through the central nervous system, the spine, and the brain. The line helps in describing the anatomical directions that we're going to be talking about relative to where it is in the central nervous system. Anterior, the idea of anterior or rostral direction, points towards the front end of the neuraxis, which is in humans would be the forehead, the chest, the front side of our body. The posterior or caudal direction points towards the back end, our back, our spine, tailbone, the back of our body. The term dorsal and ventral are used to describe positions relative to the neuraxis. Dorsal indicates the upper back side, while ventral refers to the front or lower side. For instance, in the human brain, dorsal refers to the top of the brain, while in the spinal cord, it refers to the back of the spinal cord. Think like a dorsal fin, like a on a fish or a porpoise of some kind. And when we're talking about ventral, the ventral refers to the bottom of the brain, like if you were thinking of the bottom of the brain. Or in the spinal cord, it refers to the front. So ventral, if you're looking at a fish, it's ventral, or a human laying horizontal with their stomach down. Ventral is here, dorsal is here. So dorsal is the back, ventral is the front. In the brain, dorsal is the top of the brain, ventral is the bottom of the brain. Okay, just so we have that clear. Lateral and medial describe positions relative to the midline of the body structure. Lateral indicates away from the midline. So if we take this idea of the midline or the midline of anything, the middle of something, and we say lateral, it's moving away from that line. If we say medial, it means it's closer to that line. So the idea is that if we take the idea of the midline and say that an example would be that the arms are lateral to the midline, or that the face or the nose or your teeth or your chin is medial to the midline. It's closer to the middle. In terms of hemispheric relations, ipsilateral refers to structures on the same side as the body, and contralateral refers to structures on the opposite side of the body. This distinction is important when understanding neural pathways, like in the case of somebody who has had a stroke. If they have a stroke on the right side, the right hemisphere, it's going to cause contralateral problems on the other side of the body. If it's ipsilateral, it's like if there's a problem on this side of the body and it affects on the right side of the brain and it affects the right side of the body, that's ipsilateral. Ipsilateral, same side, contralateral, opposite side. So there's the idea of cross sections of the nervous system are important for studying internal structures. Cross sections is a cut that is perpendicular to the neuraxis. So cross sections, right? Different types of cross sections include frontal or coronal sections, which divides the brain into anterior and posterior parts. The horizontal section, which slices the brain into upper and lower parts. Then there's the sagittal section, which divides the brain into left and right parts. Mid-sagittal plane specifically refers to a cut along the midline, dividing the brain into equal lefts and halves. So the mid-sagittal plane is here. These anatomical terms are important to understand the essential functioning and organization of the nervous system, aiding in the study of neuroanatomy and also helps professionals diagnose neurological disorders. So today's episode, we're diving into the fascinating world of the meninges and the cerebral spinal fluid. These are the unsung heroes that protect and nourish the brain and spinal cord. So let's start peeling back the layers of the meninges and exploring what each does. So picture your brain and spinal cord as sitting comfortably inside your skull and your spine. Okay? These precious organs are wrapped in 3 protective layers known as meninges. These layers are the dura mater, and the arachnoid membrane, and the pia mater. Each layer has a unique role, and together they provide a formidable defense system. First up, let's talk about the dura mater. This is the outermost layer. It is tough as nails. In fact, dura mater means tough mother in Latin. So it actually really lives up to what it's actually called. The dura mater is a thick, durable membrane made of dense connective tissue. Its primary function is to protect the brain and spinal cord from physical impacts. Think of it as a hard helmet, providing a solid shield against injuries, against trauma. This layer, the dura mater, also supports large blood vessels that carry blood from the brain, ensuring that the brain gets enough oxygen and nutrients that it needs. Beneath the dura mater is a thing we call the arachnoid membrane. This layer gets its name from the spider web-like appearance. The arachnoid is a thin, delicate layer that acts as a cushion for the brain. It's not tough like the dura mater, but it's still incredibly important. The arachnoid membrane is involved in the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid, and we'll talk more about that later in the podcast, which provides buoyancy and further protection to the brain. This layer helps create a buffer zone so that the brain isn't directly jostled every time all the movements we make as human beings. Now let's talk about the pia mater. The innermost layer of the meninges, the pia mater, is a very thin and delicate membrane that clings tightly to the surface of the brain or spinal cord, following every contour and groove. Think of it like plastic wrap, like you put plastic wrap over like a pie or a cake or something. It clings to it, wraps around every little nook and cranny. The pia mater is rich in blood vessels and supplies the brain with essential nutrients and oxygen. Its close contact helps keep the brain and nervous tissue well nourished and healthy. Between the arachnoid membrane and the pia mater is the subarachnoid space. This space is crucial because it's filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is clear, colorless fluid that is produced in the brain's ventricles. It flows around the brain and spinal cord, acting as a cushion to protect the brain and spinal cord from injury. Floating in a pool. Think about floating in a pool and how your brain is enveloped by this fluid, and you feel buoyant. You feel like it's holding you up, like it's cushioned. Cerebral spinal fluid does more than just act as a cushion, though. It also serves to remove waste products from the brain and spinal cord. The brain, like any other organ, produces waste as it works, and the cerebral spinal fluid helps to flush out this waste, keeping the environment around the neurons nice and healthy and clean. Additionally, the central nervous system plays a role in maintaining stable pressure within the skull, right? Just like different, like blood pressure, like other types of pressures. This pressure that the cerebral spinal fluid provides is really important to the functioning of the brain. So in summary, the meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid are multi-layer defense systems for the brain and spinal cord. The dura mater provides tough outer protection, the arachnoid membrane offers a cushioning middle layer, and the pia mater keeps things snug and nourished right up against the nervous tissue. The subarachnoid space and cerebrospinal fluid add an extra layer of cushioning and help keep everything clean and balanced. Understanding these structures gives us a greater appreciation of how the brain and our body are designed to protect the most vital organ we have, which is the brain. So let's dive into the intricate workings of the brain's ventricular system and the production of the cerebrospinal fluid. This system plays a crucial role in maintaining the brain's health and functionality. So let's embark on the journey through the ventricles and uncover how this fluid is produced, circulated, and managed. The ventricular system is a network of interconnected cavities in the brain where cerebrospinal fluid is produced and circulates. These cavities, or ventricles, are essential for protecting the brain, removing waste, and maintaining a level of homeostasis. Starting with the lateral ventricles. These are the largest ventricles, and there are two of them, one in each hemisphere of the brain. They are C-shaped and extend through the frontal, parietal, and occipital lobes, curving into the temporal lobe. The lateral ventricles are where the majority of cerebrospinal fluid is produced, thanks to a special tissue called choroid plexus. The choroid plexus is rich in blood vessels and filters blood plasma to produce the clear, nutrient-rich cerebrospinal fluid. From the lateral ventricles, the cerebrospinal fluid flows into the third ventricle, a narrow, vertically oriented cavity located in the midline of the brain, between the two halves of the thalamus. The third ventricle, the aqueduct of Sylvanus, a slender canal that connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. This passage is crucial for the flow of cerebrospinal fluid, and any blockage there can lead to serious conditions. The fourth ventricle sits at the base of the brain, between the brainstem and the cerebellum. It's the last stop in the ventricular system before the cerebrospinal fluid enters the subarachnoid space around the brain and spinal cord. Within the fourth ventricle, more cerebrospinal fluid is produced by any other section of the choroid plexus. The fluid then exits the ventricular system through a small opening called the foramina, entering the subarachnoid space, where it bathes the brain and spinal cord, providing cushioning and removing metabolic waste. An important part of this system involves the arachnoid granulations, or arachnoid villi, which are small protrusions of the arachnoid membrane into the superior sagittal sinus, a large venous cavity or channel. These granulations allow the cerebrospinal fluid to be absorbed back into the bloodstream. This reabsorption process ensures that the amount of cerebrospinal fluid remains consistent, balancing production and removal. The superior sagittal sinus is a crucial part of this process. It's a large venous channel running along the top of the brain between the layers of the dura mater. The cerebrospinal fluid is drained into the sinus, then returns to the venous system, where it is ultimately filtered out by the kidneys. One condition related to the ventricular system that we should discuss is obstructive hydrocephalus. This occurs when there is a blockage in the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, where often the cerebral aqueduct causing fluid to build up in the ventricles. This leads to increased intracranial pressure and often involves surgically inserting a shunt so that to divert the excess fluid to other parts of the body so it can be reabsorbed. So to summarize that part, the ventricular system and the production of the cerebral spinal fluid are critical for the brain's health. The ventricles, lateral, third, and fourth, the cerebral aqueduct, create pathways for the cerebral spinal fluid to flow through the brain, providing cushioning and nutrient transport. The choroid plexus in each ventricle produces cerebral spinal fluid, which then circulates through the brain and spinal cord before being reabsorbed by the arachnoid granulations into the superior sagittal sinus. Understanding this system helps us appreciate how finely tuned our bodies are to maintain a delicate balance necessary for optimal brain functioning. So now let's take a deep dive into the central nervous system and its intricate development. This journey through the central nervous system will lead us to the origin of the brain and spinal cord, right from the earliest stages of embryonic development and the complex structures that allow us to think, feel, and move. So let's take a look at it. So let's talk about the neural tube. The central nervous system begins its development as a simple structure called a neural tube. This tube forms during the early stages of embryogenesis, around the third week of pregnancy. So it's at one point your nervous system was just basically a hollow tube. It all starts with the ectoderm, the outermost layer of the embryo, which folds inward to create a neural groove. The edges of this groove come together and fuse to form a neural tube, which will eventually develop into a brain and spinal cord. The neural tube is essentially a hollow structure, but soon begins to change. The anterior or front end of the tube will swell and fold to form the brain, while the posterior or back end will develop into a spinal cord. This early differentiation sets the stage for complex structures to follow this development. Let's talk about the ventricular zone. One of the critical regions within the developing neural tube is the ventricular zone. This is a layer of proliferative cell linings inside the neural tube. These cells are progenitors of the entire nervous system. Think of the ventricular zone as a bustling construction site where the blueprints for the brain and spinal cord are being drawn up and executed. Radioglia and founder cells. Within the ventricular zone, there are special cells called radioglia and founder cells. Radioglia serve as both scaffolding and guides for newly formed neurons, helping them migrate to their proper locations. Founder cells are the initial neural progenitor cells that will give rise to all different types of cells in the central nervous system. The development of the central nervous system involves two cell divisions: symmetrical division and asymmetrical division. During symmetrical division, the founder cells divide to produce two identical progenitor cells. This process increases the number of progenitor cells, expanding the pool of cells that will eventually become the central nervous system. As development progresses, founder cells switch to asymmetrical division. In this mode, each division produces one progenitor cell and one new neuron, or different type of brain cell. The progenitor cells remain in the ventricular zone to continue dividing while the neurons begin the journey to their final destination. This switch from symmetrical to asymmetrical division is crucial for building up the complex layers of the brain. Now let's talk about the cerebral cortex. As neurons migrate away from the ventricular zone, they form the various layers of the brain, including the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the outermost layer of the brain and is responsible for many higher order functions like perceptions, cognition, voluntary movement. The development of the cortex involves the precise organization of neurons into specific layers, each with distinct functions. Not all cells produced during central nervous system development will survive. A process called apoptosis, or programmed cell death, plays a crucial role in shaping the final structure of the brain and spinal cord. Apoptosis helps eliminate excess cells, ensuring that remaining cells are correctly positioned and properly connected. This process is essential for fine-tuning the neural circuits that underlie brain functioning. The human brain has undergone significant evolution to become the complex organ that it is today. One of the most remarkable aspects of this evolution is the expansion of the cerebral cortex, particularly the prefrontal cortex. This area of the brain is associated with executive functioning, such as decision-making, planning, and social behavior. During human evolution, the brain's size and complexity increases dramatically. This expansion is thought to be linked to various factors, including change in diet, social structures, environmental challenges. The development of tools, language, and culture all likely played a role in driving the evolution of the human brain. So let's talk about some key concepts regarding what we've already talked about. The neural tube forms from the ectoderm during embryogenesis, develops into the brain and spinal cord. The ventricular zone, layer of proliferative cells lining the neural tube, progenitors of the entire nervous system. Radial glia and founder cells. Radial glia, scaffolding that guides the neuron migration, and founder cells, initial progenitor cells. The asymmetrical and symmetrical division of cells increases progenitor cell pool. Asymmetrical division produces one progenitor cell and one neuron. The cerebral cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, responsible for perception, cognition, and voluntary movement. Apoptosis, programmed cell death, eliminates excess cells and fine-tunes neural circuits. The evolution of the human brain, expansion of the cerebral cortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, linked to diet, social structures, and environmental challenges. So let's take a deeper dive into the developmental stages. Let's take a closer look at the stages of central nervous system development, focusing on how each phase contributes to the final functioning brain and spinal cord. Early neural development. In the early stages, after the neural tube forms, it segments into different regions that will become distinct parts of the central nervous system. The anterior part forms three primary brain vesicles. These, the forebrain, the prosencephalon, the midbrain, the mesencephalon, hindbrain, which is the rhombencephalon. These vesicles will further subdivide and specialize. Cellular differentiation and migration. Each cell continues to proliferate in the ventricular zone. They begin to differentiate into various types of neurons and glial cells. Radial glia play a crucial role here, guiding these new neurons to their correct location. Neurons migrate along the radial glial fibers, climbing from the ventricular zone to the destined position to develop new brain layers. Layer formation in the cortex. The cerebral cortex develops in a highly organized manner, forming 6 distinct layers. Each layer has specific types of neurons and connections. This layered structure is critical for the cortex's role in processing information. Neurons in each layer connect to different brain regions, creating a complex network that's essential for cognition and sensory perception. Now let's talk about synaptogenesis and circuit formation. Once the neurons reach their destination, they begin to form synapses, the connections through which they communicate with other neurons. This process is called synaptogenesis. It is crucial for the establishment of neural circuits. The patterns of these connections are influenced by genetic instruction and environmental factors, making each brain unique. Pruning and refinement. As the brain matures, it goes through the process of synaptic pruning, where excess synapses are eliminated. This refinement helps optimize neural circuits, ensuring that the most efficient necessary connections remain. Apoptosis also contributes to this refinement, selectively removing cells that are no longer needed. The role of genetics and environment. The development of the central nervous system is a tightly regulated process influenced by both genetic and environmental factors. Genes provide the blueprint for neural development, guiding the formation of structures and pathways. However, environmental factors such as nutrition, sensory experiences, and social interactions also play significant roles in shaping the brain. Advances in understanding brain development. There's been recent advances in neuroscience and imaging techniques that have provided a deeper insight into the central nervous system development. Technologies like MRI, genetic sequencing have allowed scientists to observe brain development in unprecedented detail, revealing the dynamic processes that occur from embryonic stage all the way through to adulthood. The human brain has very unique features. One of the unique features of the human brain is its remarkable plasticity. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking a lot about plasticity, neuroplasticity, synaptic plasticity, because this podcast is really about change, about eliciting change in people's lives, right? So that's all based on neuroplasticity. So we're going to delve deep into that. But even after the primary phases of development, the brain continues to change and adapt to responses to the experiences that the individual has. This ability to recognize and form new connections underlies learning and memory, enabling humans to acquire new skills and adapt to changing environments. In conclusion, understanding the development of the central nervous system provides a window into the remarkable complexity and adaptability of the human brain, from the formation of the neural tube to the intricate processes of cell division, migration, and synaptogenesis. Each step is a testament to the orchestrated dance of biology that results in our cognitive and sensory abilities. As we continue to explore the depths of the brain development, we gain a greater appreciation for the factors that shape who we are and how we experience the world. And so now let's shift gears into talking about the structures and the development of the forebrain. The most complex and involved part of the brain is the forebrain. It's responsible for many of the functions that make us uniquely human. Our use of logic and reason, forebrain. Our ability to use language, forebrain. We'll explore the intricate architecture and the fascinating processes that shape its development. So let's talk about the details of the forebrain. So the forebrain, or prosencephalon, is the largest part of the brain, encompassing a variety of structures responsible for sensory, motor functioning, and cognition, emotion, and memory. It's divided into two major regions, the telencephalon and the diencephalon. The telencephalon includes the cerebral hemispheres, the largest part of the forebrain, which are divided into left and right hemispheres. These hemispheres are covered by the cerebral cortex and include the subcortical regions such as the basal ganglia and the limbic system. Cerebral cortex and its landmarks. The cerebral cortex is a highly folded layer of gray matter, characterized by various folds and grooves that increase surface area. The folds are called gyri, and the grooves are called sulci. Or sulcus in the singular version of it, and constitute like the deeper fissures. The primary visual cortex, located in the occipital lobe, the primary visual cortex processes visual information. It is situated around the calcarine fissure. The primary auditory cortex, found in the temporal lobe, and it processes auditory information and is located near the lateral fissure. The primary somatosensory cortex, located in the parietal lobe, this cortex processes sensory information from the body. It lies just behind the central sulcus. The primary motor cortex, situated in the frontal lobe, it controls voluntary movements. It is located just in front of the central sulcus. and the insular cortex, hidden within the lateral fissure. The insular cortex is involved in diverse functions such as emotion and creating homeostasis. So let's talk about the lobes of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 major lobes, each associated with different functions. You have the frontal lobe, which is responsible for executive functioning, decision-making, problem-solving, and the control of our behavior. It houses the primary motor cortex and the prefrontal cortex. Then you have the parietal lobe. This processes sensory information, including touch, temperature, and pain. It includes the primary somatosensory cortex and the sensory association cortex. The temporal lobe is involved in processing auditory information and memory. It includes the primary auditory cortex. The occipital lobe, dedicated to processing visual information, housing the primary visual cortex, the neocortex and the limbic cortex. So the neocortex is the largest part of the cerebral cortex, involved in higher order brain functioning, such as sensory perception, cognition, generation of motor commands. The limbic cortex, including the structures like the cingulate gyrus, is part of the limbic system, which is involved in emotion, behavior, and long-term memory. There's subcortical structures. The limbic system is the subcortical structures, and it includes these several important structures, which is the hippocampus, crucial for memory formation and spatial navigation. The amygdala, which in this podcast we're going to talk a lot about that because the amygdala is very important for understanding how we process certain emotions, especially threat emotions or fear. The amygdala is involved in processes of emotions such as fear and pleasure. The fornix, a bundle of fibers that connects the hippocampus with other parts of the limbic system. The mammillary bodies are involved in recollective memory. There's the basal ganglia, are a group of nuclei involved in controlling movement and motor learning, including the caudate nucleus, which is involved in motor processing and associative learning. The putamen works with the caudate nucleus to regulate movement, and the globus pallidus is involved in the regulation of voluntary movement. The diencephalon include the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus is a relay station for sensory and motor signals to the cerebral cortex. It contains several important nuclei. The lateral geniculate nucleus processes visual information. The medial geniculate nucleus processes auditory information. The ventrolateral nucleus involved in motor control. The hypothalamus is a small but crucial part of the brain involved in maintaining homeostasis. It regulates vital functions such as temperature, hunger, thirst, and circadian rhythms. It controls anterior and posterior pituitary glands, which release hormones influencing growth, metabolism, and reproduction. The optic chiasm, the point where optic nerves cross, crucial for visual processing. The anterior pituitary gland releases hormones that regulate stress, growth, and reproduction. The posterior pituitary gland stores and releases hormones produced by the hypothalamus, such as oxytocin and vasopressin, which we're going to talk about a lot in this podcast, in the subsequent episodes of this podcast. So the development of the forebrain. The development of the forebrain is a complex process that begins at early embryogenesis. The forebrain starts as part of a neural tube, as we discussed, which differentiates into the prosencephalon. This further divides into the telencephalon and the diencephalon. Cellular proliferation and differentiation. Within the ventricular zone of the neural tube, progenitor cells divide and give rise to neurons and glial cells. The radial glia guide these new neurons to their final destination in developing the different regions of the brain. The cortical layer formation. Neurons migrate along the radial glia to form the layers of the cerebral cortex. This migration is critical for establishing the structures and connectivity of the cortex. The neocortex, which has 6 distinct layers, forms in an inside-out pattern, where the innermost layers form first, followed by the outermost layers. Synaptogenesis and synaptic pruning. Once neurons reach their destination, they begin to form synapses, creating the intricate network necessary for brain functioning. This process, called synaptogenesis, is followed by synaptic pruning, where excess synapses are eliminated to refine the circuits. So the evolution and the forebrain. The human forebrain has undergone significant evolution, particularly in the expansion of the cerebral cortex. This expansion has been linked to the development of complex cognitive abilities, language, and social behaviors. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in the executive functioning, has particularly enlarged, setting humans apart from other primates. So what are the key structures here that we've been talking about? You have the sensory and motor areas. The primary sensory area of the cerebral cortex receives and processes sensory information. The primary visual cortex processes visual input from the eyes. The primary auditory cortex processes auditory information from the ears. And the primary somatosensory cortex processes tactile information from the body. The primary motor cortex is responsible for generating neural impulses that control execution of movement. The association areas. The sensory association cortex integrates sensory information from different modalities, allowing for complex perception and action. The prefrontal cortex is involved in planning, decision-making, and social behavior. The limbic system, which is a very important part of the brain, something I talk about in my practice and when I'm teaching a class. The limbic system plays a crucial role in emotion, memory, and motivation. It includes the hippocampus, essential for forming new memories, the amygdala, processing social reactions, and the cingulate gyrus, involved in emotional regulation and processing. The basal ganglia are involved in regulation of voluntary movement. They play a role in motor control, motor learning, and routine behavior or habits. The diencephalon, the thalamus, acts as the brain's relay station, directing sensory and motor signals to the cortex. The hypothalamus maintains homeostasis and controls the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. Hormonal regulation is also the hypothalamus's job, from the pituitary gland, which affects growth, metabolism, and reproduction. Now let's talk about the corpus callosum, which we've talked about in previous episodes in a kind of a different context. But the corpus callosum is a thick band of nerve fibers that connects the left and right cerebral hemispheres. It facilitates interhemispheric communication. This structure is essential for the integration of sensory and motor information from both sides of the body. Then we have the neocortex. It is involved in higher order brain functioning, including sensory perception, generation of motor commands, spatial reasoning, conscious thought, and language. Its 6-layer structure is the hallmark of mammalian brains and is particularly developed in humans. The limbic cortex. The limbic cortex includes the cingulate gyrus and other structures involved in emotional processing and memory. It is part of the limbic system and plays a role in regulating autonomic and endocrine function in response to emotional stimuli. So, in summary, the forebrain, particularly the telencephalon, is responsible for many of the higher functions that we characterize as human behavior and cognition. It's what sets us apart from other primates. Its development involves the complex interplay of genetics and environment factors that shape the intricate architecture of the brain, from the formation of the neural tube to the expansion of the neocortex. Each stage of development is crucial for the proper functioning of the central nervous system. Understanding these structures and the development of these structures, particularly the forebrain, not only provides insight into how we perceive and interact with the world, but it also highlights the delicate balance required for maintaining brain health. Advances in neuroscience such as fMRI and MRI and PET scans continue to unravel the mystery of the brain, offering a new perspective on how we think, feel, and live. So that is the forebrain. Now we're going to dive into the midbrain, which is a crucial component of the brainstem that plays a pivotal role in a variety of essential functions, also known as the mesencephalon. The midbrain is situated between the forebrain and the hindbrain, serving as a central hub for sensory and motor pathways. Let's explore the key structures of the midbrain and their functions. So the mesencephalon, the midbrain, is a small but mighty part of the brainstem. Despite its size, it's packed with structures that are vital for processing sensory information and coordinating movement. The midbrain is divided into two main regions, the tectum and the tegmentum. The tectum is the dorsal part of the midbrain, so it's on the top of the midbrain. It contains two pairs of bumps known as superior colliculi and inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi, these structures are involved in visual processing and eye movement. They help coordinate head and eye movement to track visual stimuli, enabling us to quickly respond to changes in our visual environment. The inferior colliculi are responsible for auditory processing. They act as relay stations for auditory signals, helping us locate and respond to sound in our environment. The tegmentum is the ventral part of the midbrain. So ventral part of the midbrain, and includes several critical structures. The reticular formation. This network of neurons runs through the brainstem, including the midbrain. It is involved in regulating sleep-wake cycles, arousal, and attention. The reticular formation plays a key role in maintaining consciousness and alertness. The periaqueductal gray matter, located around the cerebral aqueduct. This area is involved in pain modulation and defensive behaviors. It plays a crucial role in the body's pain suppression system. We got the red nucleus. This structure is important for motor coordination, particularly for limb movement. It helps relay signals from the cerebellum and the motor cortex to the spinal cord. The substantia nigra. This area is crucial for movement and is heavily involved in the control of voluntary movement. The substantia nigra produces dopamine, a neurotransmitter essential for motor control. Dysfunction in this area is associated with Parkinson's disease. So let's talk about the brainstem integration, how it integrates with the other parts of the brain. The midbrain is the central part of the brainstem, which also includes the pons and the medulla oblongata. The brainstem serves as a conduit for information traveling between the brain and the spinal cord, playing a crucial role in the autonomic functions such as the heart rate, respiration, and our various reflexes. So, in summary, the midbrain, or the mesencephalon, is a vital structure within the brain that integrates sensory and motor functions. Its key components are the tectum and the tegmentum. They are involved in visual and auditory processing, motor coordination, pain modulation, and maintaining an arousal and alertness. Structures such as the superior and inferior colliculi, reticular formation, periaqueductal gray matter, and red nucleus, as well as the substantia nigra, each contribute to the midbrain's diverse functions, highlighting the importance of in our everyday lives. Understanding the midbrain helps us appreciate the complexity of the brain's architecture and its role in seamlessly integrating sensory inputs and motor outputs. allowing for us to interact and respond to our environment effectively. We just talked about forebrain, the midbrain, and some of their functioning. Now we're going to discuss the third part of the tribune brain, which is the hindbrain, a fundamental part of the brain that controls many basic life functions and motor coordination. The hindbrain is divided into two main parts, the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. Let's dive into these structures and their functions. The metencephalon includes the cerebellum and the pons. The cerebellum is something you've probably heard of many times, and it's crucial for motor control and coordination. It's located in the back of the brain under the cerebral hemispheres. The cerebellum is composed of the cerebellar cortex. This is the outer layer of the cerebellum, containing tightly folded layers of neurons. It processes information about body position, movement, and fine-tuning our motor activities. The cerebellum is crucial for motor coordination and motor control. It is located in the back of the brain under the brain cerebral hemispheres. The cerebellum is composed of the cerebellar cortex. This is the outer layer of the cerebellum containing tightly folded layers of neurons. It processes information about the body position and movement and fine-tunes our motor activities. The deep cerebellar nuclei. These are clusters of neurons located within the cerebellum. They receive and process information from the cerebellar cortex and send it out to other parts of the brain and spinal cord to coordinate movement. The cerebellar peduncles. These are thick bundles of nerve fibers that connect the cerebellum to the brainstem. They facilitate communication between the cerebellum and other parts of the brain, allowing for the integration of motor commands. So we got the pons, which is situated above the medulla oblongata and is in front of the cerebellum. It serves as a bridge between various parts of the nervous system, including the cerebellum and the cerebrum. The pons is involved in regulating sleep, respiration, swallowing, bladder control, hearing, equilibrium, taste, eye movement, facial expressions, and your posture. So the myelencephalon primarily consists of the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem, connecting the brain to the spinal cord. It regulates vital autonomic functioning, such as the heart rate, blood pressure, breathing. The medulla also contains reflex centers for vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and swallowing. So, in summary, the hindbrain encompasses the metencephalon, which is the cerebellum and the pons, and the myelencephalon, which is the medulla oblongata. It is essential for motor coordination and basic life functioning. The cerebellum fine-tunes motor activity, the pons acts as a communication hub, and the medulla oblongata controls vital autonomic processes. Understanding these structures highlights the foundational role of the hindbrain in maintaining everyday activities, overall well-being, and how we interact with our environment on a motor level and a autonomic level. So the next part we're going to talk about in this episode is the spinal cord, a vital structure that acts as the main conduit for information between the brain and the rest of the body. The spinal cord is a long cylindrical structure housed within the vertebral column. It extends from the base of the brain down to the lower back. So let's explore some of the key components of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is made up of a series of segments, each giving rise to a pair of spinal roots, the dorsal roots and the ventral root. The dorsal root contains sensory nerve fibers that carry information from the body to the spinal cord. These fibers transmit sensations such as touch, pain, and temperature. The dorsal root ganglion, located near the spinal cord, contains cell bodies of these sensory neurons. The ventral root contains motor nerve fibers that carry commands from the spinal cord to the muscles. These fibers are responsible for initiating, controlling, and the voluntary movements and reflexes we have. So let's talk about the cauda equina. The spinal cord doesn't exist the entire length of the vertebral column. Instead, it ends around lumbar 1 and lumbar 2 vertebral levels, right? Below this point, a bundle of spinal nerves called the cauda equina continues down the vertebral canal. The cauda equina resembles the horse's tail, hence the name. These nerves innervate the lower body, including the legs and pelvic organs. The caudal block. A caudal block is a type of regional anesthesia administered into the epidural space near the cauda equina. It is often used in surgeries for pain relief for the lower body. By numbing the nerves in this area, the caudal block can effectively manage pain without affecting the entire body. So the spinal cord is a crucial part of the central nervous system, facilitating communication between the brain and the body. The dorsal and ventral roots carry sensory and motor information respectively. The cauda equina extends beyond the spinal cord, innervating the lower body. Techniques like the caudal block leverages the anatomy of the spinal cord for effective regional anesthesia. Understanding these components highlights the spinal cord's central role in our sensory and motor functioning. So that's the spinal cord. Quick understanding of how it processes and sends information. So let's continue the deeper dive into the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, which are the afferent neurons and efferent axons. The afferent axons and the efferent axons. I'm going to say afferent and efferent because they sound very similar. And the dorsal root ganglia. The spinal nerves in the spinal cord give rise to these nerves, right? Which are mixed nerves containing both sensory and motor fibers. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, each emerging from the spinal cord through the intervertebral foramina. These nerves are critical for transmitting information between the spinal cord and the rest of the body. Afferent, AFFERENT axons and the dorsal root ganglia. Afferent axons are sensory nerves, fibers that carry signals from the body to the spinal cord. These axons enter the spinal cord via the dorsal root. The cell bodies of these sensory neurons are located in clusters known as the dorsal root ganglia. These ganglia are situated just outside of the spinal cord and serve to relay points for sensory information, including touch, pain, temperature, and proprioception, which is understanding the body, where the body is positioned in space. The afferent or efferent neuron or axons, EFFERENT axons, are motor nerve fibers that transmit commands from the spinal cord to the muscles and glands. So afferent, AFFERENT, are nerve fibers that send signals to the spinal cord and the brain. Efferent or afferent axons, which are EFFERENT, send signals from the brain and spinal cord to the body, usually the muscles and glands. These axons exit the spinal cord through the ventral root. Efferent or efferent axons are responsible for initiating and controlling voluntary movements and autonomic responses such as reflexes. So the integration of sensory and motor functions. So our sensory and motor functions need to be highly integrated so that we can respond and react to the environment and the stimuli that we receive. The integration of afferent and efferent axons within the spinal nerves allows for efficient communication between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. This integration is vital for body's ability to respond to sensory input with the appropriate motor action, maintaining homeostasis and enabling our various complex behaviors. So spinal nerves comprising of both afferent and efferent neurons, afferent and efferent neurons, are essential for sensory and motor communication between the spinal cord and the body. Afferent neurons carry sensory information to the spinal cord, and their cell bodies housed in the dorsal root ganglia. Efferent neurons transmit motor commands from the spinal cord to the muscles. This coordinated network ensures our ability to perceive and react to the environment efficiently. Understanding these components underscores the spinal cord's pivotal role in our nervous system. So now let's enter the fascinating realm of the cranial nerves, which are a set of nerves that emerge directly from the brain and are responsible for many critical functions. And we'll also discuss the vagus nerve and the olfactory bulbs, all of those play a key role in our sensory and autonomic functioning. So what are cranial nerves? The human body has 12 pairs of cranial nerves, each designated by a Roman numeral and a specific name. These nerves arise directly from the brain and brainstem and are responsible for a wide range of sensory and motor functionings, primarily the head and neck. Let's talk about a brief overview of their structures. You have the olfactory nerve, responsible for the sense of smell. It connects directly to the olfactory bulb. You have the optic nerve, carries visual information from the retina to the brain. You have the oculomotor nerve, controls most of our eye movement, including pupil constriction and dilation. The trochlear nerve, which controls the supraoblique muscles of the eye, which helps in looking downward and laterally, down and laterally. The trigeminal nerve, responsible for facial sensation, motor functions, and biting and chewing. The abducens nerve is what controls the lateral rectus muscles of the eye, enabling lateral eye movement. Facial nerve manages facial expressions, secretions of saliva and tears, taste sensations from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Vestibular cochlear nerve, involved in hearing and balance. The glossopharyngeal nerve provides taste sensation from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue and contributes to swallowing and salivation. The vagus nerve, which you hear a lot about, controls a vast range of functioning, including heart rate, digestion, and respiratory rate. The accessory nerve supplies the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscle to coordinate head movement. The hypoglossal nerve controls tongue movement necessary for speech and swallowing. So let's talk about the vagus nerve, which is the cranial nerve 10. Are among the most extensive and influential of the cranial nerves. They extend from the brainstem to the abdomen, innervating various organs, including the heart, lungs, and digestive tract. The vagus nerve plays a crucial role in the autonomic functioning of the nervous system, regulating involuntary functions such as heart rate, digestion, and respiratory rate. They help modulate parasympathetic nervous system, promote a state of rest and digestion. Additionally, the vagus nerves are also involved in sensory function, transmitting information about the state of the organs back to the brain. So we have the olfactory bulb. This is a neural structure involved in the sense of smell, located at the front of the brain, just above the nasal cavity. It receives sensory information from the olfactory nerve. The olfactory receptors in the nasal epithelial detect odor molecules and send signals through the olfactory nerve to the olfactory bulb. Here, the signals are processed and relayed to other parts of the brain, including the olfactory cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. There's a direct connection between our sense of smell and the emotional centers of our brain. This explains why certain scents evoke strong memories and emotional responses. So in summary, the cranial nerves are an integral part of our sensory and motor functions, particularly in the head and neck. Each of the 12 cranial nerve has specific roles, from controlling eye movement to managing facial expressions and taste. The vagus nerve extends beyond the head and neck, playing a vital role in autonomic functions such as sensory communication between organs in the brain. The olfactory bulb is essential for processing smell, linked to emotion and memory. Understanding these structures underscores the complexity and precision of our nervous system, highlighting how different components work together to perform intricate tasks. So now we're going to be talking about the autonomic nervous system. It's a critical part of our nervous system that controls involuntary bodily functions. We'll explore components including the somatic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic divisions, and the sympathetic ganglia. The sympathetic ganglion chain and the preganglionic neurons, postganglionic neurons, and the adrenal medulla. So the autonomic nervous system regulates involuntary physical functions such as heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate, pupillary responses, urination, and sexual arousal. It operates largely outside of our conscious control and is divided into two main branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. The somatic nervous system, before diving deeper into the autonomic nervous system, it's essential to differentiate it from the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary movement, transmits sensory information to the central nervous system. It involves motor neurons and innervates skeletal muscle, allowing us to perform conscious actions like walking, picking up objects, and speaking. The sympathetic division prepares the body for intense physical activity and often referred to as the fight or flight system. It increases heart rate, dilates airways, and releases stored energy to respond to stress or any kind of danger. The sympathetic divisions fibers originate in the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord. These fibers connect to the sympathetic ganglia, which are clusters of nerve cell bodies. The sympathetic ganglion chain or sympathetic trunk runs parallel to the spinal cord on both sides of the spinal cord itself, containing a series of interconnected ganglia. The preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. In the sympathetic divisions, nerve pathways consist of preganglionic neurons and postganglionic neurons. Preganglionic neurons originate in the spinal cord and travel to the sympathetic ganglia. Here, they synapse with postganglionic neurons, which extend to target organs and tissue, exerting their effect on the heart rate, blood vessels, and other organs. The adrenal medulla is a specialized part of the sympathetic nervous system. It is located in the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, where it stimulates the preganglionic neurons. The adrenal medulla releases adrenaline or epinephrine, noradrenaline or norepinephrine into the bloodstream. These hormones enhance the fight or flight response, increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and energy availability. In contrast, the parasympathetic divisions promote rest and digestion, conserving energy and promoting bodily functions like digestion and relaxation. It decreases heart rate and constricts airways and stimulates the digestive process. Parasympathetic fibers originate from the brainstem and sacral spinal cord. The major parasympathetic nerve is the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10, which innervates many organs including heart, lungs, and digestive tract. The comparison between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. The sympathetic division, pathways that use short preganglionic neurons and long postganglionic neurons. It mobilizes energy stores and increases cardiac output and dilates pupils. The parasympathetic division promotes energy conservation and relaxation. It generally uses long preganglionic neurons and short postganglionic neurons. It stimulates digestion, reduces cardiac output, and constricts pupils. So let's talk about the integration and balance of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system maintains homeostasis by balancing the action of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. This balance allows the body to respond to changes in the environment, such as stress and relaxation, maintaining optimal internal conditions. So in summary, the autonomic nervous system is crucial for regulating involuntary physiological functions. It comprises the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, which have opposite effects on our bodily functions to maintain homeostasis. The sympathetic division prepares the body for fight or flight responses involving structures like the sympathetic ganglia, the sympathetic ganglion chain, the postganglionic and preganglionic neurons, and the adrenal medulla. The parasympathetic divisions promote rest and digestion activities with significant input from the vagus nerve. Understanding these systems highlights the intricate and autonomic processes that keep our bodies functioning smoothly. So that's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode next week. Please like and subscribe, and we'll get more understanding of how your nervous system works and other functions of the body. This podcast is really meant to be able to educate people on how their bodies work and how they can, in subsequent episodes, use this knowledge to improve their physiology, improve their life in general. We're going to be delving into a lot of mental health stuff, and I'm setting it up where, there's going to be a certain level of educational material and discussion about the brain and spinal cord and how they function and how we can use that information for improvements in life. But I'm also going to be setting up a subscription service where we talk about how we can use various understandings from cognitive behavioral therapy and other types of therapies and philosophies to be able to improve our way of thinking, improve our motivation, and improve many aspects that really lead to a person having a powerful mind. So thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.